I am so happy to be with someone I love deeply as a great friend, look up to immensely as one of the truly great teachers, and have learned so much from because I had the honor to read his absolutely extraordinary masterpiece, New Self, New World. I'm talking about Philip Sheppard. And I shall never forget meeting Philip several years ago now. I was in Toronto working with Marion Woodman, and this very gracious, very polite, very dignified man came up to me with an enormous manuscript and said, "Would you read this?" And because I'm British, I said yes. My heart sank because it was a pile. And I had a long plane journey, and I began to read the manuscript of New Self, New World. And I could not believe my eyes because this is not only an amazingly beautifully written book, it is a pioneering book of divine embodiment. And as all of you know, my new book with Carolyn Baker, Radical Regeneration, is about understanding at the deepest level that this time is a global dark night with the secret divine intention of birthing through the terrible experience that we're living through a new divine embodied humanity. And there is no one on the planet, and I mean this, Philip, who is teaching this with greater grace and greater practicality than you. Because one of the many things I admire so much about you is that you've been spending these last years not only getting out other books like Radical Wholeness, which is a marvelous introduction at the deepest level to a big masterpiece, but also takes it further in a vision of the integrated divine human being. Not only have you been able to continue to pour out your gorgeous prose, but you've been establishing yourself as a global teacher, and you've been creating, I think it's 150 practices, which are now available on your website for people like me who are discovering the marvel of having a body and trying to do with all the flaws and follies of my nature this crucial work of embodiment. So I bless you and I thank you and I bow to you, and I'm so thrilled to be with you.
Oh, Andrew, the bows go both ways, as you know, because New Self, New World. I felt really alone because it had like kind of secluded myself for 10 years writing this thing, and how then to build the bridges into the world. And I don't know that the book would have been published without you, and it certainly wouldn't have had its name because you christened it
Did
New Self,
I?
New World. Yes, you
Oh,
did.
New Self, New World. I give you a title, but it remains a book that gets everywhere. It's getting out everywhere. I keep meeting people. I had several extraordinary people on a trip I took to South India whose only, and I realized that my importance was that I knew you because they'd already become devotees of your work. They said, "Oh, we love Philip Sheppard, and we saw that you wrote an introduction to his book, so we thought he can't be all bad."
Oh, Andrew.
Can I
Oh,
begin with asking you a really simple question? But what is embodiment for you at this moment of your life and your mission and your teaching? If you were to speak to all the people who are watching this, what would you say about the crucial importance of understanding as far as we can the challenges and beauties of getting into our body and understanding from a completely fresh perspective what the body really is?
in the simplest of terms, for me, embodiment is a state in which the whole of my intelligence comes into coherence.
Mm.
Now, we think of intelligence as an enclosed sort of biological consequence of chemical interactions. That's reductionistic and nonsensical. Intelligence is a field in which the world abides. So for me to come into my full intelligence and feel the coherence of it necessarily opens to the world and to the tendrils of it and the currents of it and the whisperings of it. And that can only happen through the body. And when it does, the world's body is your body. And and thinking, there's this wound with which we are all inflicted in our culture. And it's a wound that has sundered our thinking from our being, so that we come to believe that we can think more clearly if we sort of tamp down and neglect all the noise below the neck and just concentrate on what the head can deliver. And you reframe that assumption, and what you're saying is, I can think more clearly with a secluded fragment of my intelligence than I can with the whole of my being. And when you think with the whole of your being, you feel tugged by the essential harmonizing of the world. I mean, nature doesn't cease, because nature is always adjusting and bringing into harmony. And I look at the world, and every single creature is grooming and nourishing and harmonizing. I look at the bird pecking on the tree, and it's cleaning the tree, and then it leaves and it flies away. And why did it fly away? Because it is called to. And every tendril of grass, every mouse burrowing in the meadow is in service to this harmony. And we have stepped away from that service as we have stepped away from the body. And being in the head, we feel ourselves separate from the world, because we have undone that bridge that the body provides us to that larger field of intelligence.
So beautiful. And I think that that is the root cause of our demonic hubris, our crazy addiction to mastery over nature, because that separation has bred such panic, such fear of nature, that we're compelled to struggle to dominate her, instead of realizing that she has already provided everything for us. And I'd just like to share two moments where I really began to not just understand, but understand and integrate at the deepest level what you're saying. One moment took place when I was visiting with friends a Stone Age tribe in the depths of the Amazon, the Achua. And I spent a morning in the big hut with everybody. And suddenly I noticed that there was nobody speaking loud. There was no fighting. There was no arguing. There was this vast, quiet, brimming, dynamic peace. And I looked up and I saw for a moment that everybody in that hut was in complete communion and rhythm with everyone else. And it truly brought tears to my eyes, because I realized this is our real state. Everyone relaxed, everyone warm, everyone attuned, the children playing, the old people entirely gathered into the harmony of the tribe, the men and the women in great dignified sensual communion. And I saw what we really are and what we so desperately need to reconnect with. And the second moment was when I was walking with my great friend who has now been gathered. I love that Victorian word, gathered. And he was the Dalai Lama of the Aborigines. His name was Bob Randall. And he was a rascal saint of great brilliance. And I adored him, and he adored me. And we were walking hand in hand through his land. And again, I came to notice something beyond words, that he wasn't simply walking through the land, he was walking with the land. And all the trees on the land were his friends. And the little creatures that appeared, he would bend down and speak to them and love them. And suddenly I realized his walking was a making love to this gorgeous raw land that had been in his family and in his clan for 150,000 years. This wasn't his land, this was his heart, this was his body, this was his home at the deepest possible level. And when he was on that land, he felt complete in a way that he never felt wherever else he was. He was very sophisticated. He could give marvelous talks in cities. But I used to see him in cities and he would always feel, oh my God, this isn't where I really belong. But he would do his best. He would go into a park and bless the park and attune to the park. So wherever he was, he would be tuning himself. But seeing him on his land made me understand viscerally what the Aborigines mean by songlines, by this fundamental soul spiritual connection. And after I left him, I had to take a plane. And I'd been given an Aboriginal painting of Uluru, of Ayers Rock, because he's one of the guardians of Ayers Rock. And on this painting, there are these extraordinary circles and jagged little points, which are the Aborigines' perception of the body of the land and of the way the energy works in the body of the land. And idiotically, I thought, well, this is a convention, this is something they know from their ancestors. But I had the most extraordinary moment because I looked out of the plane window as we were going over Uluru, and for a second, I saw those circles of power in the land. I saw that songline. I saw it with my open eyes, and I realized that because I had been partly attuned by being with Bob, my whole body, mind, heart, soul, and body was now able to receive the reality of the unified field that is transcendent and immanent and everywhere. And at that moment, I understood that the work of embodiment is to come gently into this pulsing, infinitely interconnected web of interrelationships that is our original blessing. And that if we remain through attunement, in connection, we will be fed by our mother all the wisdom we need, all the peace we need, all the clarity we need. Because when we are attuned, everything that we need to make our own lives wiser, richer, deeper, kinder is naturally given to us. And then I realized, oh my God, we have been on entirely the wrong journey for thousands of years. We have been addicted to transcendence, not only the life of the head, but the life of the light. Instead of the light and the embodied creations of the light, the marriage of form and formlessness that the Buddha celebrates, that all great mystics wake up to. And then I realized that the next work for us as a human race is to marry the deepest perceptions of the patriarchal traditions of transcendence, and we do owe them a great debt. The Upanishads and their breakthrough into the eternal transcendence of the light is a major step, but we have to integrate that great discovery with everything it left behind, the divine wisdom of the indigenous traditions. Because when we marry the wisdom of transcendence with the wisdom of immanence and start attuning ourselves to the field, we are naturally born as what we naturally already are, divine human beings, in love with the world and each other and every animal and every leaf and every stone and every rushing stream and everything in the entire cosmos is ours by nature. So that was how I came to it. And it's been a very difficult journey. And that leads me to my second question. And this is something I would love you to talk at length about from your experience. You're now teaching all over the world, and you have, thank God, a whole slew of absolutely devoted pupils who are doing your work with such dedication and joy that it's truly moving when I speak to them. What do you discover are the major difficulties that we encounter as we take on this journey? What were your difficulties? What did you discover was embedded in your DNA that you had to work patiently with? And what do you notice your pupils working with to come into this new glowing relationship with everything?
We are dealing with a very deep addiction. And to frame that addiction, I might offer a model for how I understand the body. And it's simplistic, but I understand the body as a singing bowl.
Mm.
And so when you speak of attunement, Andrew, that's this. That's, the singing bowl rings to the present, rings to the world. Now, what we've done is we have stuffed that with anxieties and compartmentalizations and tensions and unresolved trauma and unresolved, unintegrated idea. So, the present is going like this, and there is no attunement. The present in its capacity as a guide and an intimate teacher does not exist.
That's it.
And then our only recourse is to take charge of ourselves. If there's no guidance in the world, we're only going to move forward by taking charge of the head. And that brings me to the addiction, which is with organizing. We organize everything. I mean, we organize our emotions. We organize our responses to friends as we meet them. We organize our thoughts. We organize our bodies. We organize everything. Now, when I'm busy organizing myself, I confound the singing bowl.
Oh, yes.
And And I make myself incapable of landing in the present. Because for me, the quality of being present is a quality in which I feel myself being organized by the world, by nature, by that field of intelligence. I'm not present, even our concept of being present is if I say to someone, just be present, their response is likely, oh, just give me a minute, and they start organizing themselves into what they imagine being present with. So they're confounding at the outset the very possibility. And you spoke of receptivity. And for me, there is an equivalence between presence and receptivity. That when I am fully receptive to you, I'm fully present to you. And when I'm fully present to you, I'm fully receptive to you. It's like two sides of a coin. Now, to understand presence as receptivity is to turn the spotlight of my attention off of myself, where I've left the world in darkness, and open it to the world. And then I can, the possibility of receiving the world without organizing it is a huge promise, and a very difficult thing for us to do, because we want to name, and we want to concatenate, and we want to know. I mean, we've got this belief that to know is to control, to know is to be in the right. And so, the presumption that the world can be known blinds us to it. The presumption that the body can be known makes us its antagonist. The present is always an unknown. And there's a gorgeous, I studied classical Japanese no theater, and there is an aesthetic term, yugen, that is considered the absolute pinnacle of achievement in this form of art that is about consummate presence. And yugen is described, I love this. I mean, there are many different ways of speaking about it, but one description is that the state of yugen is like akin to entering a dark forest with no thought of returning. And to see that on stage, there's no holding, there's no grasping, there is just this opening, that cleansing of the presumption of needing to know and being able to know, and moving into receptivity. You are trusting the world's guidance. You are landing on the wave as a surfer rides it into shore. And that trust is one of the main difficulties that people encounter. And it shows up. We have demonized the earth. I mean, literally, where's hell? Oh, it's down there. And where's heaven? Oh, it's up there. It's that
Yes.
transcendence that you speak of. I mean, we are standing on the earth without feeling it. And I've encountered several descriptions of Europeans living with Aboriginal communities, and a few times I've come across a description. This one Congolese explorer, Jean-Pierre Allais, was following this boy to another village, and the boy, while there was a log across the river, and the boy walked across it, this slippery log, and Jean-Pierre went to walk across it, and of course slipped and fell in the river. And the boy looked at him with an expression that said, why did you do that? It wouldn't have occurred to the boy that you could fall off the log. You just walk across it.
Yes.
Obviously, it was done on purpose, but it was very puzzling. But we don't feel the earth. We don't rest on the earth. And that, you know, until you rest on the earth, you do not rest in the present. I just feel that so deeply. But in our culture, we have been exhorted to go up, to transcend, to such an extent that in our value system, down is bad. I mean, geez, Andrew, you're looking a little down today. We know what that means. And in another culture, the same phrase could mean you're looking at peace with yourself and at rest on the earth. How wonderful.
Wouldn't it be
Just,
wonderful if we said
oh,
to each other, "You're looking so up today, please come down"?
yes.
Yes, you're up in your head, you're up in your. But when I listen to you, these are the thoughts I have. Presence is receptivity, but receptivity, and you know this, is also vulnerability to the world. And as I have become more and more embodied, I feel more and more of the pain of others, the pain of animals suffering, the pain of grandmothers weeping over the bodies of dead children on the TV. And I've realized that one of the deepest blocks to embodiment is terror at feeling. You will not escape when you are truly embodied. Being in relationship with everything. You'll be in relationship with the joy, the spaciousness, the peace, but also everything that's out there will be in here, and you will feel what people are feeling in a time when the world is burning in so many obvious ways. So there's that I deal with in myself and in my pupils, that terror of the vulnerability that comes from receptivity. The other thing I've noticed, and this is something that I came to truly understand through my analysis, which was an 11-year long, very committed analysis with a really fierce, gorgeous Jewish lion of a guy, Nathan Schwartz at Salant, who had my number and wasn't in the slightest bit concerned with Andrew Harvey, but deeply loving of Andrew. And we became the greatest of friends. And he said, "You live from," at least I'd got down to my heart center, which was fantastic. He said, "But you're terrified of going into your belly because so much of the trauma of your life, your relationship with your mother and everything that happened to you at school and your own experience of the difficulty of coming to terms with your sexuality, all the stuff we all deal with, whether you're gay or straight, you know." And I suddenly realized it halfway through my analysis when I actually started to consciously work on getting into that part of my body, how much agony came up as I really began to consciously pray and work tenderly to release it. So receptivity means vulnerability, but it also means releasing the agonies stored in the body, releasing them to be healed, but first having the courage to feel them again. Because as you know, one of the great strengths of a Jungian approach to analysis is its treatment of the shadow. It's gentle but fierce treatment of the shadow. First, you have to re-experience what has happened to you. And the reality of the way in which we're made is that those experiences are stored as blocks and traumatic intensities in the body itself. And I've just had a very profound experience of this because I've just had a hip operation, as you know, and I've had my right hip changed. And when I was 7 years old, a group of school kids found out that I had Indian blood. And although it was the twilight of the Raj in India, Indians had taken over, there was still a lot of racism in the English kids that I was being educated with. So they started calling me a nigger, right? And they rushed me to this cliff and they threw me over the cliff. Fortunately, it wasn't a very high cliff, but I broke my right leg. And then this sadistic gym mistress turned up and made me walk on my right leg across this field. And idiotic, good boy though I was, I did, but I fainted and it damaged my leg. And I spent 6 months recovering from it. And all my life, I have lived with that memory of torment and exclusion and humiliation for the strange amalgam of East and West that I am, very subconsciously. But when I came to go through this hip operation, I realized, oh my God, now I have the chance to heal all of this by loving this leg through the healing process. And I had an overwhelming realization which changed the whole process for me. And I think it goes directly to this set of complexes we have about our body. One night I was in a lot of pain. It's a painful recuperation. Everybody who goes through it goes through the same thing. So there's a whole club of us that could talk about it. But I first was exasperated by the pain because I had 32 things that I had to do and I knew I had to do them and I was going, the usual organizing principle. And then I said, why not think of the pain as the first touches of love healing you? Love has to hurt you in these ways, but it's not hurting you to punish you or to remind you that the body has to be mastered and controlled and you have to get well soon so that you can function as this teacher that you are. Why don't you see it as a unified field of love, which works first by really alerting you to what needs to be healed by making you feel the pain of the healing, but that is not a curse. It's the beginning of an astonishing blessing. And that changed everything. And I realized from that experience just how we've been trained to view the inevitable creaks and weirdnesses that happen in the body when you're young, but especially at the age we are now, instead of seeing them as enemies that have to be mastered by exercise, to see them as wonderful, tender reminders of mortality so they can make us wiser, but also as invitations to a deeper love and cherishing of this extraordinary, unbelievably kind animal body that has gone through so much and supported our crazinesses through so much. It's been a kind of revolution in my heart, and I have been sharing that with people because I know that everyone has been brought up with that kind of idiotic vision of pain and limitation. It's the pain that is the first signs of healing, and it's the limitation that allows us to enter humbly into the unified field and have a much larger, more glorious experience of this world for the few remaining years that we've graced it.
Absolutely. And for me, that there is that pain that we store in the body, and it's like any pain. We want to get rid of it or shut it down because it's interfering. And I think for me there are two sort of necessary steps, and the first is what could not be expressed needs to be expressed. There is no integrating it or shifting it until it can live and find expression. And that is disallowed by our culture. You're not allowed to rant or let things through the body. You need to keep that all tidy. And to allow that pain to be expressed and then to integrate it. And that integration can only happen through love.
That's it.
Love is is the embrace, is the full acknowledgement of, and I think of it, I, I think of it a little like a, a murmuration of starlings.
Mm.
And there is this starling that is not part of this gorgeous undulating swarm of birds. And it is erratic. It is lost, and then it joins the murmuration, and its movement is harmonized by the whole, and it is adding a new intelligence, a new sensitivity to the whole. And I find exactly that when there is something not integrated, that as we allow the expression, as we bring it home to the pelvic bowl, as we, I feel the pelvic bowl as the realm of being, my ground of being. I feel there. And so to bring it to that realm, it's like bringing the starling into the murmuration. And I am it's not just that unintegrated energy is now integrated. It is that I am made more intelligent, to go back to that first, embodiment as the whole of my intelligence brought into coherence.
And I would say even more than that, you saying it with typical decency and tact and courtesy, but the reality is that we're not really intelligent until we're embodied.
Yeah.
We're intelligent with only one power of ourselves. When all those powers come into coherence, we are massively naturally intelligent. And that leads me to something that I've really opened up to actually in the Dalai Lama's presence, because being around him and loving him so deeply and being hungry with every pore to learn from him, I've noticed something about him, that he is utterly transcendent and utterly in his body, and that gives him the supremely tender, compassionate intelligence with which he does everything. And I give you two examples of this enlightened presence. Once, there was a whole group of us, and there was a friend of mine who was dying, and her last great wish in the world was to be in the presence of the Dalai Lama. And she came to Paris, where he was briefly. We'd done a film, and he was coming for the premiere of the film. And there was a small group, and I got her into the group. He comes into the room. He's very, very, he looks around, he feels everyone, and he went immediately to her. And it was just breathtaking. That she hadn't said anything. She was hidden about 7 rows back. He just walked through everybody and he went to her, and he took her in his arms and he blessed her, because his being, his body, his field was so acutely sensitive that he knew that she was the one that needed him the most. And the second tremendous exhibition of this Zayami Zen-like Yugan presence that he has in a way that I've never known it in anyone. It's simply astounding around him. Was when he was giving these very extraordinary secret teachings on the transfiguration process as understood in Buddhism, which he was giving to a group of people, and we had to apply, and we had to be bona fide in Tibetan Buddhism. We went through this sort of process, and then we were allowed in. There were 300 of us in this rather bizarre Australian hotel. And the teaching started at 10, and we were all there, obviously, very expectant. It was so extraordinary what we had been given. And then he would come in from the back, and he would spend at least 10 minutes walking up the center of the hall slowly. And he'd be turning, he'd be looking, he'd be smiling, he'd be holding out his hand, he'd be touching. But the effect of that slowness, that presence, that gathering of all of us into his cosmic embrace was that by the end of those 10 minutes, we were in a state of absolute alertness, intelligence, and presence ourselves, so that he could go effortlessly through the teachings. I've never seen anything like it. And afterwards, I asked him something. I said, what do you do when you're sitting there to gather people in? Oh, he says, very simple. I just imagine that from my heart, there are golden threads going out to everyone in the room, and from everyone's heart in the room to everyone else. Then I imagine their heart, mind, souls, and bodies all lit up with golden light. And that's when I begin to teach. But it's such an example, isn't it, of what you're speaking of?
Yeah, it reminds me, when you look at the word intelligence, it comes from a Latin root that means to gather.
Really?
Yeah, legare.
Ligare, of course, to bind.
Yes,
That this is the
there,
binding.
there's the image, that golden thread. I mean, there it is, and then
Exactly.
you are feeling, and words aren't necessary because you are attuning back to that word.
Well, the words that come from someone who's in that state carry the full blessing of that state. And that's something that should revolutionize our understanding of intelligence, because words that, however brilliant, that come from a partial part of yourself will never reach the fullness of the being in front of you.
You remind me of I was teaching a workshop, and someone asked me where my voice was centered. And I think they were, did you feel it centered in the heart or lower down, maybe in the diaphragm or lower? And I felt into the question, and I realized my voice was centered in the middle of our circle. That was the source of my words. That was the source of my voice. It was it was the only kind of honest answer I could give to that question.
Wonderful answer.
Yeah.
One of the great discoveries that you've made available to us in your work is the discovery that is scientifically valid of the two brains in the body. And this corresponds to what the indigenous know. It corresponds to what the tantric systems know. They have different words for it. But all of the beings that have worked on radical embodiment, whether it's from the indigenous tradition or the great tantric traditions, know that there are two interrelated brains in the body. And I'd love you to express it in your own terms, because this was for me one of the revolutions of your book, and I'm more and more experiencing the interior brain.
Yeah, I should start by paying homage to an Australian Aborigine understanding. For them, there are the three brains: the heart, the head, and the belly. And the belly is
Well,
our
that's of course
primary,
the truth. Yes,
the
those two.
primary intelligence. And their metaphor for the brain and the head is a tangled fishing net. You know, it has it has its
I don't
value,
recognize
but
that one at all.
it reminds me too, the Okanagan tribe out west in North America. Their word for insane translates as thinking inside the head. That's
God.
insanity. And clearly we exemplify it, and so as I experience it, as I feel it, there is a polarity within my body between the female aspect in the pelvic bowl and the male aspect in the head, and both are needed. They There is a love between them. And that love is expressed through the body when the body is spacious.
That's
Like
it.
there's this spacious corridor, and it's a continual exchange. And the head.
It's a current, actually. It's a
Yeah,
warm energy current. It's
yeah,
actually an erotic current
absolutely.
at the highest, sweetest level, isn't it?
Yeah, and to distinguish a little more clearly between those two poles, the strength of the head and its intelligence is in gaining perspective. And according to its perspectives, it organizes and systemizes and analyzes. But the nub of perspective, the sort of sine qua non of perspective, is that you have distance. You have stepped back. And so with that with that distance, you gain perspective. But if you stay there, you are at a distance from the world, from life, from yourself. And by contrast, that intelligence in the pelvic bowl, it's where we can consciously be as distinct from where we can consciously think. And it comes into felt relationship rather than glomming onto known relationship. And that exchange between them results in a unity of our thinking and our being, such that there is no longer any difference between them. Every thought resonates through the cavern of the body and is clarified as it does, and every sensation in the body is recognized as a form of thinking. And
So,
and
yes.
and we have contracted into an image of what it means to be human that relies on a fantasy. It relies on the fantasy of independence. You can't point out a single example in the cosmos
There
of
is no such
independence.
thing.
There's no such thing, and yet it's what we strive for, and it's specifically the fantasy of the tyrant.
That's
So,
it.
so for me, tyranny is the result of a male consciousness that has turned its back on the female consciousness. That is tyranny. And that is the aloneness and the independence and just to be clear,
And the violence.
and the violence and the control and the division and the fear. I mean, as soon as you feel alone in the world, and it's an utter fantasy because you are felt more intimately by the world around you than you could possibly feel yourself. You are known through and through and held in every moment. But that fantasy of independence, it is what leads to the self-organization, because because your thoughts feel private, and your experience is private, and when your experience is strictly private, then your primary goal in life is to organize it to make it successful.
Mm.
And then and then that addiction comes, and the obsessiveness and the absolute um, incapability of either feeling the harmony of the world or according with it, because we've substituted order and organization for harmony. We seek control and order, and harmony is a product of wholeness, and we have blinded ourselves to wholeness. And then again, the only recourse is this the violence of that dissociated intelligence.
Precisely. And this is where we're going to a vision. You called your great second book Radical Wholeness. And one of the things that's so essential now to get over to ourselves and to others is that the goal is not perfection, it's wholeness. Perfection is a fantasy of the dissociated male mind. It's Apollo's fantasy on crack. It's a disaster. There is nothing perfect. I love that Zen story of the great master who has a favorite pupil who's a bit anal. So the favorite pupil turns up as the best little boy in the world and goes to the master, and he gets the koan right. And the master says, okay, you've done so well. This is fantastic. Go and clear the sand garden by the old tree. And he's so thrilled to please the master, and he clears it absolutely pristinely. The master comes out and giggles to himself because it's so perfect. And he says to the guy, there's only one thing lacking. And he shakes the autumn tree, and a few golden leaves fall perfectly imperfectly on the white sand, and the pupil attains awakening.
Mm.
That's that's what embodiment teaches you, isn't it? That you can't control and you shouldn't control, because the organizing intelligence of nature is creating a beauty so much greater than anything you could imagine. This is why Beethoven, when he wrote his symphonies, he didn't write them at his desk. He would go out into the woods with his big dirty boots, and he would walk and walk, and you could see it in his notebooks because there's rain on his notebooks, and his great melodies would come and he would scratch them out, no, and write no, and then listen more and vibrate more, and then suddenly it would come. But he always said it wasn't him.
Wow.
It was those woods, those streams, that nature that he adored with his gruff, raucous being, that gave him that power and that vision and that inspiration. That's why his work is so sublime, but it's not just transcendent, it's grounded. That's why it has such elemental, primordial power. Wow.
That's gorgeous. And it what it brings to mind is a quote by Heraclitus, who is my favorite of the ancient Greek philosophers. And this simple line, the deeper harmony is stronger than the apparent. And in our culture, we obsess over the apparent harmony, the perfection, the sand, and that deeper harmony, the strength of it. I mean, how can you listen to Beethoven and not feel it? I didn't know that story, but it makes so much sense to me.
I bet Bach did a lot of walking too.
Einstein did too.
You do your running. I'm more sedate and British about it. But we're coming to an end, and I would love to just get back to the marriage of our works, the marriage of this new book, Radical Regeneration, that I've written with Carolyn, and your work. We both know that we're in a terrifying crisis, a crisis on every level. And I know you know just how devastating this crisis is and how it could be terminal. But I know you also know that this crisis could also be, if we really listened and attuned ourselves to what it's screaming at us, it could be the invitation to enter into this new embodied dimension from which all kinds of new intuitions and solutions and miraculous communions could be born. We've experienced that in the depths of our own journeys. So I would love to ask you, my last question is, what does radical regeneration of the world mean to you from the depths of your work? Why are you doing this work with such endless harmonic energy? Why are you pouring yourself out when you could be sitting there writing your wonderful books?
I'd like to start just by saying, expressing my gratitude for that book, Radical Regeneration, Andrew. It is so clear-eyed. It is so courageous, and at the same time, it is so supportive. I mean, in the midst of the bleakness which we must face, there is abiding hope. And it's a hope that I share, and who knows what awaits us. But I think this birth canal, that this dark place of compression and
This dark forest in a way that we don't know. Yes.
yeah, if we can come through that, understanding that we belong, then suddenly everything that happens to the world happens to us. I mean, suddenly there is tenderness. I mean, the intelligence in the head cannot feel tenderness. And so it mauls things with its bluntness. And our view of nature is so akin to our view of the body. It's there to do our bidding. It's there to be exploited for whatever we can get from it. And occasionally it needs maintenance, the right vitamins or the right fertilizer, or whatever it is. And it's such a deeply, deeply corrupt view. And the journey back to belonging, the journey back to the body is a recognition that the female element is paramount.
Absolutely.
That the female element,
The male is there to support and adore and revere and harmonize the sometimes chaotic energies of the feminine, but always knowing that they are the source of truth and life and energy and joy.
yes, and that
That's the
that,
key of keys, isn't it? It's the
that
key to Taoism. It's the key to what. Yeah, sorry.
no, yes, yes, and I just want that cliched image of the man going down on one knee before his beloved and offering the ring. I mean, whatever gifts of perspective we gain, they only find their full value as they are brought down through the body and offered in humility to that deeper intelligence to be integrated. And you can have 1,000 rings at home and they will mean nothing. That single ring means nothing until it is offered in humility and accepted. And
So
this,
beautiful.
the differentiation between intelligence and cleverness needs to be understood. And cleverness is fun, and it has such a dark side to it. And until we come back to intelligence, which I understand as sensitivity,
It's love.
it's love. But like if you think of a sensitivity to music, to birdsong, to a child's tears, to color, there are a billion sensitivities, and every one of them is a form of intelligence. And what a sensitivity needs is to be grounded, because a sensitivity is necessarily reactive. If the retina didn't react, we wouldn't see. And so to take that reactivity and ground it, grounded sensitivity, if we can grow out of cleverness and into grounded sensitivity, into that belonging, that adoration of the female.
As you
That's
speak, I just have a vision, which I've shared with you before, is that wouldn't it be wonderful if the Israelis and the Palestinians did a day of your exercises in the body before they started to negotiate? So they just meditate and do these embodiment exercises with each other. And at the end of that day, you couldn't possibly see the other as an enemy because you'd be in that harmonized state. You'd have disagreements, but they would be negotiated with so much more clarity and generosity. It would just flow naturally. Imagine if the current Republicans and the Democrats would do that as we face this terrible, tragic situation that we're enduring in America. They wouldn't be able to demonize each other in that way. They would have to, from that shared experience of grounding and flowering of sensitivity, amazing new kinds of clear friendship would be established. This isn't pie in the sky magic stuff. This is the birth that you and I are talking about in
This is the radical regeneration. This is
the radical regeneration.
Yeah, it's interesting that I think that the Latin root of regeneration is female generics.
Yes, genus genera, right.
There you go.
Yes.
So yeah,
Species, yes.
there it is.
There it is. Regeneration is about the species. That's what the
Yeah.
species does when it's in embodied harmony. It regenerates. A tree regenerates, a cat regenerates. My cat regenerates all the time because she's in peace with everything.
Yes.
And harmonized at the most exquisite level I've ever imagined seeing. It's so astonishing what we're offered, and we must grasp it now.
Yes.
And thank you so much for agreeing to send my 40 days and 40 nights prayer journey out for people, the one that I'm beginning on February the 17th, because for me, prayer and embodiment are very deeply connected. Because prayer establishes this crucial direct relationship with the beloved field, the field as beloved. So when you're praying, you're really, if you're praying deeply and with naked sincerity, you are praying to your large, vast you that you are one with. You're like a light drop praying to the great light ocean that you are one with, and that infinitely cherishes you because you're made of the same substance. And that's why I've created this journey at this time, because the more we can experience that direct relationship and how we live in a participatory universe, which is the essence of prayer, the more we can come into this radical wholeness that gives us astounding access to wisdom naturally. Everything's within us. The whole universe is within us. We're given these tools by the marriage of the upper brain and the lower brain, the male brain and the female brain, as you call it. Everything's there if only we do the tender, loving work of attunement to stay in the stream of what is already gloriously ours. And that's why this prayer journey is, I think, a vital thing for people at this moment to do, because prayer establishes that fundamental connection with the electric harmony of reality. And that's why I'm offering at this moment.
And your description of prayer is, for me, almost identical to how I would describe embodiment. It's about that connection with the larger whole. Yeah.
And that's what a great no actor has. When you were watching Supreme No, you're watching actors and praying with their entire body. The whole, from beginning to end, it's a prayer. And if you're really experiencing no at the end of it, you are in a completely, not altered state, but totally sober, ecstatic, calm, embodied state with no need to say anything or do anything, just brimful with
clarity of being.
Clarity of being. I love you, Philip. It's been such an honor.
Oh, for me too, Andy.
I bow to you, my friend. Thank you.
And I so look forward to participating in your prayers and to sharing them.
Thank you. Thank you. And I so look forward to everybody getting to your website and doing your practices, because they will help so much. So please tell us your website and where people can come to your practices.
My website is embodiedpresent.com.
embodiedpresent.com. How wonderful. Cheeky
Uh,
beast. Yes.
yeah, and you know, it's there. There's lots of free stuff that people can dip into. There are free practices they can try out, and there's a course that is starting March 1st. It's a 28-day course called Recalibrating the Self.
Oh,
Um, yeah, and it's
gorgeous. Everyone do this course. I'll do this course. Constant recalibration is the name of the game, isn't it?
oh gracious, yeah,
Yeah. And it's endless, isn't it, this process?
absolutely.
It
I mean, that's
never
the thing.
ends, does it?
It's the
There's
thing
no
about
destination.
no. It's I mean, you never wake up one morning and you say, "Oh, finally, I'm whole. What's next on the agenda?"
No, Sham said to Rumi, the world of God is a world of endless expansion. And once you've found the beginnings of wholeness, you realize you're in that field that is
Yeah,
endlessly rich and fertile and expansive,
yeah,
like
and
a
it's a
vast sea.
process, not a place.
No,
Yeah.
nowhere to go, just everywhere to be, right?
Beautiful,
Love
beautiful.
you, Philip.
Thank
God
you.
bless you. Thank you so much.